now, you've probably heard that setting goals is a great way to get motivated. But did you know that not all goals are created equal? For example, saying, I want to get fit might not be as effective as a more specific target, like I want to be able to run 5Ks without stopping. Why? Well, it's all tied to the human brain and its reward systems. So, how can you set good, realistic money goals that you'll actually want to stick to? That's today on Money and a Good Life. It doesn't matter where you are in your money journey, it's important to have goals. And by the end of this episode, you're going to know how to make good ones. My name is Stephanie Coombs. I'm here again with the experts. Hello to my co-host, Ryan Watson.
Hi,
Hello.
Steph. How are you?
I'm not too bad, mate. And we have a goal-setting expert with us today, financial advisor, Rachael Holder. Hey, Rachael.
Hi, Steph.
Now, this is a question for both of you, and I'm going to start with you, Rachael, because you're the guest. Are you working on any goals at the moment?
I am. So my lofty goal at the moment is to become a bit better at tennis. So I'm a big fan, but my enthusiasm much surpasses my skill. I am not very good. So that's my current goal.
Okay, what about you, Ryan?
I'd like to say golf, but I don't have a lot of passion for it. So one of the key things, we're executing a home renovation at the moment.
Really?
So working our way through that goal.
And your goal is to still have a relationship at the end?
No, goal is to survive the architect, to be honest, but yeah, maybe for another time.
So, all right, well, we'll start. Why is it important to have a money goal, Rachael?
So your money goals are often going to be intrinsically linked to other things that are important to you in your life. So you think about all the things that you want to do. There's probably a bit of a financial base around that. It's very difficult to know where you're trying to get to, what you need to do if you don't have a goal. So that's why we talk about the importance of setting those money goals so you can work towards your targets.
So what are some of the goals that people traditionally have come to you with?
Yeah, great question. We often get retirement. So people want to retire at a certain time. Things like wanting to start a family. Maybe people want to take some time off to be able to do that. They might need to think about things like fertility treatment. I think goals in financial services has changed a bit over the years. So previously, we weren't very good at setting goals in financial services, and you tended to get very kind of vague things. So what we try and focus on now is more about the why. What is it that you want to do? Why do you want to do that? Rather than specifically coming in with, I want to do X with my finances. And we then work back from there.
Have you also seen that people's goals have changed from when you might have been beginning your career to now?
Yeah, absolutely. As Rach mentioned, people's goals tend to be quite generic, but now, whether it's, the advent of more qualitative or being post-COVID, people are really prioritising what's important to them. So placing far greater emphasis on the qualitative things, i.e. the good life, their time, and where they actually invest that time and energy.
So once upon a time, someone would have come to you and said, I want to have $1 million in savings.
Yeah. Or how do I get a 12% return? Now, without embarrassing Rach, people with the IQ and the EQ can extract why that's important to them. That's the key thing, and it comes down to the human foundation. That's generally where we end up, isn't it, Rach?
Absolutely. So that's a really, really big one. So money isn't just about a number on a balance sheet. And if somebody's coming to you saying, like Ryan said, I want a 12% return a year, well, why? What does that actually mean? What does the 12% return do for you? So it's really helping people dig into what that means, why it's important. What do you want to do with that money?
So instead of saying I want a 12% return, you might dig deeper and find out that I actually just want more time and I want that money so I can go down to 4 days a week.
Yeah, time's a huge one. So one that we often get, say if somebody said, I want to be rich or I want to do this, I want to earn X amount a year. Maybe that's actually that they're feeling really burnt out at work. They're quite stressed. They're not spending as much time as they want to with their friends and their family. So that's actually more about them getting time back. And that's what the money's there for. It may have been that when they were younger, they went through a time where things were really unsettled financially. They were really unstable. So actually, this is much more of a protective thing for them in terms of I don't want to go back there. So it's really working out what's driving that.
So, and fair to say, Rach, we get a lot of people who come in with extrinsic motivators, and that's based on the news and what they hear in society and social media. But a good, even a great advisor can help people understand their implicit needs, what's really important to them.
So let's talk then about bad goals. Do people ever come to you, say, with a really bad goal that you probably think doesn't suit their life? Can you steer them away from it, or do you try and dig deeper? How do you come to terms with that?
So no goal is really a bad goal. It's just something that's very personal to somebody, but often people haven't thought about the why. So as we've mentioned before, it could be something that's very, very generic. It could be something that's really hard to actually implement because you haven't thought about, well, what do I need to do today to actually move closer to that goal? It could simply be that somebody has heard something, a bit like Ryan was talking about earlier. My friends are doing X, Y, Z, or this is happening in the world and I'm reacting to it, rather than actually thinking about why is something important to you.
And that's what I really like about the type of advice we provide at Tribeca. It's client-centric and it's what's important to people. Our job tends to be more than scratching the surface and helping people find alignment around what's really important to them.
On the topic of not just scratching the surface and going a little bit deeper, I've heard you talk a little bit about money scripts before, and you mentioned, Rachel, about learning how people are sort of feeling, and it might not be about them in the moment. It might be something that goes a little bit deeper in their lives. So what is a money script?
Completely. Money scripts are really, really interesting. So these are experiences and stories that people have and the way that they've developed a relationship with money. And often that's developed much, much earlier than we would expect. There's a lot of research that shows that even by the age of 7, people have already developed the base of their money script. Now, you think about that, that's incredibly young. And what it's saying is that even at such a young age, we're picking up on things around us and developing our views of money from that. So you think about things like how your parents maybe interacted with money, people around you when you were younger, cultural things. So we see that in different cultures, people have very, very different money scripts. And they can be really, really long-lasting defining beliefs that implement how you feel in terms of your financial well-being, but also those decisions that you make. So say, for example, you saw your parents weren't great with money when you were younger, a lot of stress around kind of bills and how they manage things. You can find that people could go maybe one of two ways. So perhaps they find it difficult to spend. They're very, very worried about their financial security. They have quite a negative interaction with money. Or maybe they've gone completely the opposite way. It's not something they think about. There's been no structure around that previously. They're very likely to spend without being conscious about it. So understanding your money script is a really good first step to working out how you feel about money, how you interact with it. This becomes even more important, say, if you're combining finances in a household. So you might have very different experiences and a very different money script. We often see that we have a spender and a saver in a relationship. People often laugh at this point because they tend to know which one they are.
There's generally one CFO in the house. Is that right, Rach?
100%.
Yeah.
So there's often one person who deals with the money, who manages that. So when you bring two people together and you're trying to build a cohesive financial plan to work towards your joint goals, understanding your own money scripts, but also the person that you're working with, that can become really important.
And Rach, helping people bring what's sometimes largely an unconscious relationship with money to be more of a conscious relationship, therefore they're empowered to create any change that they want.
Definitely. That's a huge part of the role of a financial advisor, is actually just bringing these things to people's attention. It's something that often people aren't aware of, they haven't thought about. And then as soon as you raise it with them, they have this kind of aha moment and they can really use that to help themselves moving forward.
And even the amount of times, Rach, that we would see clients sit there in a partnership of 30 years and one turns to the other and says, I've never heard you say that before.
Yeah.
Bit of a penny drop moment, Steph.
How do you make this conscious and not subconscious? How do you bring people's awareness to their own habits that they have been doing for years and have not been aware? Like, what is it that you do to trigger that sort of awareness?
So we have quite a set formula that we use in meetings with people, just because we've been through this so many times and we know the kind of questions to ask and the things that bring this out in people. So we actually have a couple of exercises that we go through that can really, really help. But I really just think it's drawing attention to things. As Ryan said, there is this aha moment and people turn to each other and they make comments and they then start to just understand it a little bit more. So I think awareness is the first step. So just talking to people about the fact that they have money scripts, they'll have past experience that are influencing what they're doing now, and then working through that with them, because sometimes it can be a bit of a shock for people. And also when we talk about things like money scripts being really kind of deep-rooted and long-lasting, that doesn't mean that you're a slave to that. It doesn't mean that you can't make changes. You absolutely can, but you need to understand where you're at first to be able to then be conscious about it.
And Steph, Rach talked about, how we engage with our clients, and, we're a big one for structure creates freedom. So we like a structured process and we can use presentations. As funny as this might sound, I think one of the most powerful pages in our discovery appointment is the blank one, where we spend time with clients asking them why they're here, and then sometimes sitting in the silence, sometimes sitting in the emotion. And if we don't think we're getting to the true cause, we'll sit there and sit in the discomfort, because that is what's really important to people. That's what they want to change. And then we can anchor to that and then build a successful financial life off the back of it. So almost the blank slide is the most important conversation in building trust.
Is there a way that you can become in the day-to-day more aware of the decisions that you're making about money and how they might be affected by previous things that have happened to you?
So I think the first step is sit down and think about it. So think about what's important to you. What are you trying to achieve? You can ask yourself some questions to understand if you do have money stories or money scripts that are impacting the way that you interact with things. So what's your first memory of money? How were your parents interacting with money when you were growing up? What would your reaction be to XYZ circumstance? That can really help to draw out, okay, where am I at? How am I feeling? What's my position? And then from there, I think that you can work back in terms of what do I actually need to be actively doing with my finances. And that's where, all sorts of things then open up in terms of putting structures in place to help you to remove some of the mental load. There are all kinds of things that you can do at that point. But I think without knowing and understanding where you're at and then where the goal setting comes in terms of where you're trying to get to, it can become very, very intimidating to know what to do next.
The other thing I'd say to that as well, Steph, is if you're money stuck, look at what you enjoy personally and professionally. Almost create a list of what brings you joy and what doesn't. And potentially there's things on the not doesn't. They might be eating into your finances. So a bit of stop and then maybe starting some new habits and keeping some others can maybe change the course of the narrative in people's mindset.
Just being aware of it. And I think that until you really understand what's driving the decisions that you're making on the day-to-day, I don't think that you'll really be able to set goals that are going to serve you in the long term, right? That's all what we're getting to here. It's like, you might set a goal that you think you want, like, oh, well, I want to have a brand new car. But when you actually look at your money story, you might be like, oh, I like sitting on a tram or sitting on a bus and reading a book because that's something I enjoy and I have more time for that. And then your goals might change. So now on to the actual nuts and bolts of making a goal. If I was to say, for example, I want to be rich, I reckon that's a pretty weak goal because what is rich to who or whatever.
Yeah.
I know that we like to use SMART goals. Can you talk me through what a SMART goal is, Rachel?
Yes, certainly. I think SMART goals come up a lot. We've probably heard about them, but actually let's think about what they are. So SMART stands for being specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and then time-bound. So your specific is the what and the how. What am I trying to do? How am I going to do it? Measurable, so how are we measuring your success? So if you can't actually look back and say, have I moved closer to my goal? Have I started achieving what I want to? Very, very difficult to know if you should proceed with that goal if you're getting any closer. Achievable, so it needs to actually be doable. One of the things that we talk about a lot is being aspirational, but also realistic. So when we're talking to clients about, look, where do you want to be in 10 years? What's important to you? We want them to push themselves. We want this to be working towards a life that they really, really want and excites them. But also we do need to be realistic about it because otherwise you're not going to make moves to get there. Is it relevant? So how aligned is it to your broader goals? If I'm working really hard at doing something, but it doesn't ultimately move me any closer to my purpose, possibly not the right goal for me to have. And then time-bound. So if we just say, for example, I want to be rich, very open-ended. What does that mean? When do we want to be rich by? What is being rich? So we need to make sure that we set a time frame on that. And ideally, the time frame should be shorter. So breaking goals down into shorter steps rather than just one really long-term goal.
How far ahead should someone making a goal be looking? I think that if I was making a goal, I find it really hard to picture who I'm going to be in 10 years' time. Actually struggle to see who I'm going to be in 5 years' time, but I can have a fairly reasonable view of myself in 1 year. Should I be accounting for all these versions of myself or should I be focusing more on the short or the long term?
I think it's about having a long-term broader goal that then your shorter-term goals help you get towards. So you want to know what you're ultimately looking at. What does Steph in 10 years want to be doing? And you're right, for some people, particularly maybe you're going through, a really transient time at the moment, something big has happened in your life. We often see people where there has been some kind of trigger event. So when you're in that moment of, I guess, stress and change and heightened emotion, it can be really difficult to imagine you in 10 years. As you said, you in 3 years might even be difficult. So we do adapt that kind of goal setting based on where people are at now. But really, it's about making sure that you've got your broader long-term goal and then what steps are we taking to get towards that. So we'll work back and say, okay, if we want to be here in 10 years, what do we need to have done by 3 years? and what action are we taking in the now, in the next 12 months to move us closer to that?
And there's a really conscious decision as to why we do that, Steph, because we want to take people out of the here and now. Get out of today, get out of tomorrow. And if it's up to 10 years, it's interesting when we work with clients and do a goal setting process and we literally put their age and the age of their kids at the top, it takes them out of today. It takes them maybe post-school, or it takes them post-university, or it might take them to say where they might have grandkids. Therefore, in a mindset, they put themselves there. Therefore, we can look at, the live and the love and the learn in terms of some of the building blocks around, what defines a good life for a lot of the people we work with.
A lot of time as well, doing something to work towards your goal does involve some kind of behavioural change. I think we sometimes think that financial advisors are always going to say, have a budget, spend less. It's not always about spending, but sometimes there is maybe a bit of change that you've got to go through, perhaps a bit of pain to get to where you want to be. Now, if you can imagine yourself living the life that you want to be living moving forward, you've really drilled down into what that looks like. You can imagine it. You know why you're doing things that are important to you. Making those changes now is so much easier because you can see what it's there for. So that's another really big point around, I guess, why we think a bit longer term.
And we often, is it fair to say, Rach, we often find that clients, when they build their confidence around the longer term and the medium term, they actually start bringing forward those goals. They build a real financial confidence and empowerment around it. And then we call it like peeling the layers of the onion, Steph. So they're really encouraged to go and do things. Not that they're ever unsatisfied, but there's a lot more to it. And in a good way, the job's never done.
I like that clarification as well of like everyone thinks that you're just going to tell me to spend less and have less fun, because that is 100% what I thought it was. It's just like, the joy police were here to tell me to, spend less, which actually is probably quite good advice.
And also we all know that if we think in short time frames, we overestimate what we could do in the short term, but we underestimate what we can do in the longer term. So when we use different time frames, we're largely amazed about what we could do when it's just changing some habits and potentially changing our financial trajectory.
Now, one of my goals, I think, is a pretty common one. Like a lot of people, I want to pay off my home loan, but that's obviously such a big task. It's actually hard for me to comprehend it happening ever at all. What can I do to improve on that goal rather than just saying I'm going to pay off my home loan, which, I'm just throwing money here and there where I've got it into my offset? Is there a way to make that a better goal?
Yeah, that's incredibly normal. So our brains are just wired to struggle with really large, lofty concepts and anything that's really abstract. So I want to pay off my home loan is very, very difficult for our brains to get around. So what you would want to do is break that down into smaller, more tangible goals. So, okay, in order to pay off my home loan in X amount of time, what do I actually need to be doing? Now, you mentioned they're putting money into your offset. Great way of doing that. So it might be that I am going to put X amount into my offset every week or every month. That money just comes out before I do anything else. You can also then remove some of the mental load as well, which is something that I'm really pro in any way that I can do. So automate some of this stuff. You have a set amount that you're going to put away. It just happens. You don't have to think about it in the background. You can then go off and focus on some other things that you want to. You're moving closer towards that goal naturally without you then having to think about it. What we also find, and I find this fascinating, is that our brains react to achieving goals and ticking things off. So people in the office sometimes laugh at me. I'm a very kind of paper-based. I have a to-do list. I write it down and I cross it off. Because when I cross something off that list, your brain genuinely gets a little dopamine hit in the same way as you do when you eat chocolate. You watch something trashy on telly that you shouldn't be watching. And if you're not getting that until you tick off your really, really big goal of I've paid down my mortgage, that's one opportunity for your reward center to react, for you to feel good about it. Whereas actually, if you're doing that in small chunks and you maybe say to yourself, in 6 months' time, I want to have paid off X amount. I want my loan to have come down to this number. And you see that you've done that. Brilliant. Tick. Dopamine hit. That encourages you to keep doing that as well.
A couple of things I'd add as well, Steph, is around if people have a mortgage, like in this instance, to do a rate review every 18 months to 2 years. There is a concept that we talk about at Tribeca. Your bank starts taking advantage of you or falling out of love. So people that review their mortgage or their rate every couple of years, they can potentially decrease the life of that mortgage by anywhere from 7 to 10 years.
It's quite a lot.
Through not paying excess interest. Plus, along the lines of what Rach said about the dopamine hit too, I think people often forget about housing values. So if it was a liquid investment like a share, you would track the price. So if it's a quarterly check-in or a half year, looking at where the value of the property is and the debt you've paid down, you're creating greater equity in that property too. I think there's a psychological win in that as well.
That sounds good to me because I am also a list writer, but I'm not a great list completer. I'm the sort of person who'll write, do a list, cross off, do a list, feel like I've done something. So I think that giving myself as many chances as possible to feel something, anything, I think the better.
Yeah. Sounds good to me.
Well, look, I think that's actually it for this episode. There's a lot to take away. Rachael, really appreciate you coming on the show with Ryan and I.
Thank you for having me.
Ryan, we like setting our listeners a little task every week. I reckon their goal should be to write a goal. How should they go about that?
Yeah. So key thing would be around making some time with yourself over the next week. That's a coffee or take yourself out for breakfast or lunch. Make the investment. Maybe a place that you don't generally go to, and then take a piece of paper and a pen, have the coffee, and then write down your own goals and just start writing. Think big.
Beautiful. Make sure you're following this podcast wherever you're listening now. We'll catch you on the next episode. Advice given in this podcast is general in nature and is not intended to influence decisions about investing or financial products. Our listeners should always seek their own professional advice that considers their own personal circumstances before making any financial decisions.